Hi, everybody. It's Susan here, and I wanted to talk to you about Neptune moving into Aries. I'm doing this video a little differently because I really want to think about what I'm saying here. It's quite a unique moment in time, and I do think we need to take some time to really contemplate where we are in our lifetimes, so collectively, of course, and individually specifically. Um, I don't like doing these videos. I think some of you know that already. I don't really enjoy the aspect of revealing myself to a wider public. And when I was little, I learned that indigenous peoples didn't like photography, which is very Neptunian, by the way. Neptune governs cameras and photography and films and all those things that hold an image that is not a real image. It's illusory. Um, and I found out that they didn't like to have their pictures taken. And as a child, I thought, oh, that's really weird. How strange that people would find that in some cases they thought their soul was being taken. And then I went on YouTube and I thought, oh, wow, this is it. Actually, never in my life have I liked having my picture taken. Not as a child, not as an adult. I don't like it. And now I'm kind of starting to realize that there's a part of me that I want to keep sacred. There's a part of me that I want to keep for myself. Now, this is not the times that we live in, but it's the times that we have to adapt to, and I'm adapting as best as I can. But for something like this, which I feel like I need to genuinely feel what I'm saying to you, I'm just here behind the camera off, and you're hearing me. And that's deliberate. So maybe you also would like to just take this moment to, whatever you're doing, if you can, just do this, listen and have your eyes closed and come inside yourself, because this is a moment in time where we can feel quite discombobulated, really out of body, really struggling to find the truth of the moment. And this is going to last for some time. So I just wanted to share my thoughts on this. What I want to say right off the bat is that we need to trust and just surrender to the flow of life as it is. Go with the flow. In all traditions, the Indian one is the one I know best, but I know in all traditions, the river is a reference to our journey through life, and the river is ever flowing and ever changing. Sometimes it's a little bit muddy, depending on the stormy weather or what's been turned up in the river. Sometimes it's very crystal clear and soft and gentle and bubbling. So the one thing that is constant in the metaphor of the river is the inconstancy of the river. And that's the one thing that is constant in life, is that things are not constant. Things change all the time. And Neptune is a part of that aspect of ourselves, which is difficult to grasp. Yeah, it's definitely an energy that is quite mysterious because it's so ephemeral and so disembodied, let's say. Yet Aries itself represents an embodiment. It represents a notion of self. So this will be a time that can be quite confusing, but extremely important on our spiritual journey, or on our journey to our collective growth, let's say, because how we are internally is how we also perceive and have an impact on the collective. So all of this to say that what I'm saying here is really mostly with reference to Neptune in Aries, but I want you to always keep in mind that we can't separate out different parts of the astrology. Everything is an interplay, just as we individually are an interplay with all of what's going on in our life and in the world. We can't just say, oh, here's Neptune and Aries and it's going to be like this. And even if we go back in time, which I'll briefly touch on later, going back in time, we're still not going to be able to get a flavor of what this particular moment is going to hold. And especially because it's a really unique moment, it's hard to overstate that. It sounds really trite to keep saying that, but it's true. We're in a moment in time where there's a configuration astrologically that is so rare, so unique, that myself especially, and many other astrologers, find it really difficult to grapple with in terms of trying to understand it. So just as a way of trying to clarify elements of this, we'll pull apart certain of these aspects, but just know that I would always want to keep in mind the entirety of the situation that we're moving into, that we currently are already in. So One thing to keep in mind is that Neptune is one of those transpersonal planets. I don't give it rulership. It's definitely an influence in our natal chart and in our transiting charts and in our lives collectively, because it's a transgenerational or a collective influence. If it impacts a planet or a point in your chart directly, especially your personal planets, meaning the interior planets like the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, and Venus, and Mars, especially Mars, because Mars is ruling Aries. But if it's impacting those placements, or let's say your ascendant, or the descendant, or the midheaven, or the IC, the Imam Chelai, that's definitely going to influence you quite strongly. For the rest, the influence could be indirect as well, which is also something to explore, and that would, again, require a look at your personal natal chart. But all of the transpersonal planets, as once Neptune moves into Aries, are going to be in either fire or air, because where Uranus is moving in July is air. That's Gemini, air sign. And where Pluto moved in last November is air. That's Aquarius, an air sign, not a water sign. And so this is an energy of inspiration, but fast change. Things being, think of swirling hot air. Think of air that is moving around and changing rapidly in the quality around us. Um, Later on in June, we're also going to have Jupiter, which is technically an outer planet, moving into water, and that's definitely going to help because Jupiter in Cancer is exalted, and that's going to bring some level of assistance, we could say, dignity and wisdom to our circumstances, the circumstances we're in right now. And then, of course, we have Saturn at the end of May. So the 25th of May, Saturn is moving in to the 0 degree point of Aries, where Neptune will be as of the 30th of March. So as I'm doing this, it's a week away, just a week before this ingress of Neptune. So that change also adds more air to the dynamic. I'm going to do a separate video on Saturn plus Neptune in Aries because that's going to change the energy. So here I'm just looking at Neptune in Aries. Also to keep in mind that this Neptune journey it's going to be about 14 years long. And with the ingress dipping in and out, it's about 6 months over 2025 before Neptune moves back on the 22nd of October back into Pisces. But it doesn't really get very far away from Pisces. It's just within the first 2 degrees of the sign. And then again on the 26th of January, it moves back into Aries. But when it does that, it's going to go into Aries and exactly meet up with Saturn again at the 0 degree point of Aries. That will be their real contact point because technically speaking, although they're in an orb of conjunction in 2025, they're not perfecting that conjunction until February of 2026. And I'll be speaking lots and lots about these different things as we come forward. I'm trying to break this down into manageable bite-sized pieces because I find that, especially in the comments, I'm finding people seem to feel overwhelmed, and that's it's what I'm trying to help you with here. I'm trying to help you avoid that. So one of the things I would say, like I just said here, is trust and surrender to the flow of life itself. Think of all the times in life that you didn't know what you didn't know, and then all of a sudden that person who's so special to you came into your life, or this opportunity came and it brought you a new purpose and meaning in your life. Or you found out that you were given an award or a raise or something really, really important, and you didn't know that that was going to happen before it happened, and yet it was already there somehow, you see, in the ethers. So look at the big picture. Get perspective in these times. Don't get too caught up in the fears and anxieties that might come up, because Neptune in Aries with all of this air and fire can create an enormous amount of anxiety. And this would be one of the things that I would think is going to be very prominent in the next decade or more, is the level of anxiety, perhaps also mental illness and issues that we need to support each other through. Um, like Mr. Rogers said, be a helper. Be a helper. Look at the helpers. They're always there. You can be one. Start out by helping yourself. At the very least, help yourself, because if you tend to one, you're tending to all. This is the tenet of all great religions. This is the looking after one is looking after all. So, yeah, as the expression is, watch the water, not the boats. This is very Neptune. Watch the waters and how they're changing. Get the bigger picture and scan the horizon. Don't focus too much on the boats coming and going. And embrace uncertainty. Embrace that. It's not known. And that doesn't mean it's scary. Just know that you never had certainty. It just is that in retrospect, it felt that way. Or maybe certain times in your life, you felt like you had lots of control and you could micromanage certain things, and it made you feel like everything was fine, just to your liking. But things will change in ways that we will be uncomfortable individually and collectively and you want to look through other times in your life where this has already happened. So this is a reminder to yourself. I've got through that. I got through that, and here I am. I'm not my story. I'm not my history. Here I am. This is very Aries. I am. So if you are able to detach from your emotions, this is maybe one of the things that Neptune brought up, let's say, is the deep emotionality of Pisces and people just feeling hyper emotional and having such a lot of reactivity to things in a way that made them feel helpless. Now, keep in mind also that the North Node is still going through Pisces. Even if many of the planets are moving into Aries, we're in this period of time between, now, let's say, and May, where the movement is very strong between Pisces and Aries. So this feeling of helplessness and then I'm going to do it kind of comes back and forth. It's got us kind of wavering at this time. So just note that this is what that is. It's what it is. There's nothing wrong with me, and there's nothing that I need to be worried about or anxious about. There's only something I will do in this moment. It's action-oriented Aries speaking there. I will do something in this moment. So once you detach from your emotions and you start looking objectively, you see the water, not the boats, you start to question, what am I doing? Is it based on fear? Is it based on my ego, my sense of needing to defend or protect? And what can happen when you shift your perspective and you go towards your desired outcome and keeping that as an ultimate target and then breaking that down into small little pieces, taking those small little actions that are not insignificant because they get you one step at a time closer to the overall goal. So we're focusing more on that sense of where I want to get to and how do I want to feel as I go there, in the process of going there, in the journey of going there, rather than in the need in this moment, my ego desire, my ego need, which is more that Mars Aries energy of I want this now, I want this now. So just try to find ways of parsing out all the different little bits of the overall vision or the goal that you have. And Neptune is very visionary. For good or bad, keep in mind which vision are you holding on to, and break it down into actionable steps. Aries represents those goal-oriented energies of Mars. So this is where we're trying to avoid analysis paralysis. So keep your eyes off the boats. Don't keep looking at all the boats. Look at the big ocean, the big water, the shifting tides and how the whole thing is in flux and in a big, big, big way. And you are now in this moment of seeing, okay, how do I feel about this moment? What do I need to take action on? Don't get distracted. The boats that are floating, bobbing up and down, those are things that are not your business. You're not in that boat. Here, looking at those, don't look at those boats. It's not your boat. So you just keep going back and forth between understanding the vision, the Neptune, and taking action in this moment. What can I do? How would I like to do that? So, for example, you want to change your job, you know it's time, or you want to leave your partner. Try to have steps towards that allow that to happen with as much grace as possible. So don't, for example, cut yourself off from financial resources by quitting out of emotionality. Uh, don't walk out on a relationship unless, of course, there's some danger, and same can be said of the job. If there's some danger to yourself, then absolutely take care of yourself and do that, and then figure it out later. But in most cases, there's an urge, and that urge is coming up from an unconscious desire to avoid something, a responsibility or the annoyance or the humdrum, the mundane, and just notice where the reality is in that situation. What's my bank account like? Do I have somewhere to go? Is there a support? Is this the thing that's going to take me towards my next step? So just break it down slowly, slowly. It might be over the course of days, or it might be over the course of a few months, and prepare to get to that direction with a sense of knowing what it is that is real in your everyday three-dimensional reality that is going to help you through this journey, which is taking you closer to a spiritual desire, spiritual journey. So yeah, this is really a unique moment in time for us to test our walk, or talk rather, to walk the talk and to really be there 100% behind what we say so easily. You know, it's so easy to throw out all of these nice spiritual things that people say, but often those people who speak the loudest about this spirituality and so on are the ones who crumble the first when the going gets tough. So notice that the people who are the strongest don't talk a lot. They don't actually want a lot of themselves, and that's because they already know who they are, and they already know the truth. And so this showing, this has been also the Pisces going through Neptune, which is that falseness of appearances, the falseness of an idealized self or an idealized world, the Instagram thing, you know, the social media self, that is revealed sooner or later, that has been a tragic sort of shadow side of the Instagram crowd and the influencers who get revealed, or who have to reveal themselves and the truth of their experience, which is not what they said it was. So walk your talk. This is the moment. Um, you know, we're also not here in the wrong time. We're here in the exact right moment. You know, it's a unique moment in time, and so are we. Unique experience of humanity. We're a unique individual, but connected inextricably to the whole, to the experience of the whole. And so we're all here to experience this. Your life is not a mistake, and you certainly are not a mistake. You know, when I was younger, I really felt that I was born too late. I was so annoyed. I was born in 66, and all my musical heroes were really, really big in the late 60s, early 70s, when I was still a kid. I got my first Beatles album when I was 6, and it was my birthday present, and I was obsessed with the Beatles. I was gonna reunite them. That's the kind of kid I was. Speaking of Pisces, I have a stellium in Pisces. So my ideal self was just we're gonna make them all friends again. Gonna make the Beatles come together again. But I did, as a young teen, I felt so frustrated that I felt like I was born in the wrong time. The music was better before. I wanted to go to Woodstock. I wanted to go to those concerts. I wanted to hang out in Soho, see my musical heroes, you know. And it was only when I made peace with my life and the timing of everything and the perfection of all of that, that I realized it was exactly what I needed to be who I am. And I was able to be calm, and I could find myself, and I could find my place in this world. Because if we keep rejecting aspects of this world, if we keep saying this is wrong, this world is wrong, this is not okay, we're playing God, and we're trying now in the, let's say, shadow side of Aries to control everything and to make it according to my will. That's the delusional aspect of Neptune in Aries, is maybe people hyper controlling to suit their will. That's going to be a part of this story. So know that, and also try not to be part of that. Don't contribute to that energy. So this this willfulness or this individuation or this sense of self, this is Aries. Aries represents the I am consciousness. Here I am. I'm born. Here I am, and the awareness of that coming through that infancy, or coming through that freshness that is life creating itself as Aries emerges from Pisces. So here I exist. I am alive in this moment, in this form, in this three-dimensional way, but not as I think it is. That's the Neptune. I'm not seeing things as they really are. Keeping that in mind is helpful right now. So as an Aries awareness, then I can act. This is what allows us to act and say, oh, I'm asserting myself. Even if we know it's not entirely true, we can still use those words. That language is still helpful because we're existing as these selves, these individuated selves that relate to each other. So we can assert, to a limited extent, our own will. But as long as we keep in mind that we're not the doer, this will also make this time a lot easier. So this is really a turning of the tides. Things are shifting, the tide is changing. And we're in an era defining moment, a big moment in history, a big moment in time. And many of our ancestors have gone through that. You know, if you think about the miracle of life itself, and how our ancestors had to go through literally hell and high water to be able to procreate, and then here we are. And here we are because of multitudes of miracles that have had to occur just to exist in this moment. If you think about, you know, just even the individual pregnancy that has resulted in you, that itself is a miracle. Like the odds are just totally against that sperm getting to that egg. And in some cases, people have had to use science and medical assistance in order to be born. And that's part of the miracle, you see? So even prior to that sense of the miracle, which is this near crazy impossibility that we should even be fertilized and then born out of this fertilized egg, it's all through the calamities and all through the disease and all through the wars and all through the collapses of the earthly realm and different, you know, events that have turned the tides again and again and again throughout time. And here we are. We are here. We are a product of all of it. We are the generational result, let's say the transgenerational product of all of our ancestral karma. And then what we do with that is our karma. And this is what we have control over. This would be the element of karma that we can manage, and which is going to show up immediately or very soon in our lifetime, that we can see the result of our actions. But karma is, in the greater sense, not just the actions that we take. So kar represents the hand. Ma is from manas, the mind, so with the actions of our hands. But it's also very much the result or the actions that are caused by the mind. So the manas, the mind, the creation of the mind, what is coming through our mind. And we want to also understand that we shouldn't pick and choose what comes up in our mind. We need to embrace all of it. Say, oh, that's in my mind. But I don't have to take action on every thought. I don't have to believe every thought. I don't have to trust every thought. I can separate myself out from that and say, oh, interesting, there's a thought. So this is where I want to bring in Mercury, because within a day of the Aries solar eclipse, Mercury is swapping places as it retrogrades back into Pisces at the Aries point, or the 0-degree Aries point, what's known as a world point. And Neptune is moving out of the preparatory phase of the world point, which is 29 Pisces, at the very end of the zodiac. And Mercury comes backwards for the second time in a few weeks, where we start to remember who we are. We start to question who we are. And that Neptune going into Aries is picking up on that information as they're conjoined in the days around the Aries solar eclipse, as well as in the days around Neptune's ingress into Aries. So that alone tells us a huge story. It's significant in and of itself, apart from all of the other stuff that's changing all around that. We just had Venus moving across Neptune as well. She's just done the same thing, moving from Aries backwards into Pisces, and then she'll come back through, and I've done videos about that you can explore for more details about the Venus retrograde. I even did a video about the Mercury retrograde. That was maybe a few days ago, a week ago. And this is a really significant part of the puzzle, let's say, to help us understand what this moment is telling us, what this energy is trying to share with us. So if you think about how Neptune has been sort of taunting us at the end of Pisces for about a year, and I can truly say that because my Mercury is at the final degree of Pisces, and that's also in a trine to my ascendant. So taunting is the word I'm going with. It has been an energy of destabilization, certainly for me personally, as many of you have noticed, making silly mistakes in videos and finding it difficult to say things. And that's Mercury on, being conjoined Neptune by transit, and then we are collectively having Mercury conjoining Neptune. So welcome to my world, briefly. And I want to just show you what that experience can feel like, or what this is going to be perhaps representing, archetypally at least, as Neptune is now moving beyond that final degree of Pisces, which is collectively part of that Aries point, the last degree of Pisces, first degree of Aries. And then Neptune finally floats its way back into Aries, or rather into Aries for the first time since the 1861 to 1875 period, when Neptune was last in Aries. And I'll give you some things around that might be interesting in terms of what might come up for us now, which seem to be on the horizon also for us now. But again, remembering that history doesn't repeat, as Mark Twain said, it just rhymes. So there are influences which will no longer be relevant to this Neptune transit in Aries that were very relevant the last time or previous times. So this is going to be a 6-month period where Neptune is spending its first time in Aries, and it's going to go back into Pisces, as I mentioned, on the 22nd of October. So this is a test drive, or can you say that with Neptune? I don't know. It's like smelling a new perfume and asking, do I like it? Do I like this perfume? But it's going to give us a little preview. So as I say, it's a little preview because as of the 25th of May, Saturn joins Neptune, and that's going to color the energy very, very differently. And I'll do a separate video about that because it's going to feel different. Have a different impact on this Neptune, but it doesn't take away from the Neptunian influence, you see. It's going to contribute to it. The Neptune influence still remains. It's just now having to be merged with the strength of Saturn. So the fact that Neptune is ingressing into Aries for that first time since 1861 to 75 is significant on its own, but all of this added influence of the solar eclipse and the conjunction with the retrograde Mercury, by the way, which rules the south node of the nodal axis, where Neptune has been conjoined to the north node, Rahu, for many months already. For the last, it's been very, very powerful since January. It's a sign for Mercury. That Pisces is a sign of debilitation as well. So it's a different way of thinking. It's a very abstract and big picture way of thinking. It puts a lot of pieces together. It's not the pragmatic, calculating, fact-oriented, precise Mercury that one finds in Virgo, for example, which can do bookkeeping, things that I can't do. Or that I can, but with so much blood, sweat, and tears. And so the fact that Mercury itself is in debilitation as it's crossing over Neptune during its ingress into Aries is suggestive of the extreme confusion and the uncertainty that we're going to have for quite a while. All right, so that's right off the bat, it's adding to the Neptune stuff, right? So again, trust, surrender, go with the flow, and get used to the truth, not the new thing, but the truth that we are always living with uncertainty. The mind just tries to shape things in a way that makes us feel that that's not true. So because the Mercury South Node, or K2 as it's also called, let's say connection, because Mercury is ruling that, is there very strongly at this time. We're also being asked to let go, letting go of something that is necessary, perhaps in a quality of simplification or a quality of recognizing where, with discernment, this is not good for me. This is something I need to let go of, and that can be an opinion. It can be a belief. It can be objects. It can be people. It can be an attitude towards yourself or towards life itself. Whatever that is, you're going to figure that out. And I've done many videos now at this point on the axis between, the Pisces and Virgo axis, and the different eclipse energies and what that means. The March 14th eclipse especially, you can look at that in terms of that releasing energy, the letting go energy. So this is letting go, but it's also with a sense that I am going towards something new, because that eclipse that happened just less than 24 hours before is a new moon eclipse. And yes, it was a new moon. There was a slide in my in my Aries eclipse video, the 12 sign video that I just posted, where I had quickly, hastily written a full moon, because I changed the chart at the last minute just to show the distinction between the full moon degree and the eclipse degree. Again, welcome to Neptune on Mercury in the last degree of Pisces. So this is the letting go with the trust, right? Trusting and surrendering and letting go. But it's in a context of confusion, meaning we're having to really focus on the water. Don't focus on the boats. Those are not your boats. You're not in those boats. And really put your trust in the spirit or God or source or the divine power that makes flowers grow and trees grow and makes the birds sing, and that beats your heart, and that it's beating my heart at the same time, and that all of our hearts are being, in resonance, and our hearts are moving because of some other force. You see, the Anahata, which is the fourth chakra name in Sanskrit, means the unstruck sound. Anahata it's unstruck. Nothing's causing that sound. It's arising by itself. There's no causation, but of course there is. The causation is huge. It's not us doing that. You can, in the small self sense, think, oh yeah, I'm beating my heart. But then would you forget to do that? How many times a day would you forget to do that if the divine were not doing that? So that divine force is the energy that you surrender to. There's a surrender to the wisdom that knows to keep your heart beating when you're so busy with your stress and anxiety, or when you're sleeping and you're not paying attention to your heart. That same thing that helps you digest and work through your toxins and eliminates that and reminds you to breathe. All of that is not you. All of it is not you. And we forget that, because we forget that we're part of all of this, that we're cooperating in this huge thing, and that it's all there for our well-being, that it's looking after us. We are loved enough that the energy of the universe keeps our heart beating. That's huge. It's huge. And it's enough to remember in this time that you're worthy of that, you see? So all of this is happening again, regardless of your opinion about it, regardless of all of the other aspects of what you might prefer or not prefer. Of course, we can do that on an everyday level. Say, I like this. I'd rather have that flavor than that flavor. Or I'd rather choose this on the menu than that. But at the very least, recognizing that that's not truly myself, and that those are temporary preferences and they don't define me, right? So it's when you start to harden into those preferences or those beliefs or those senses of opinion, and you harden into that and you think this is me, that's when you start to really cause a lot of trouble for yourself, both physical and psychological and emotional, but also in terms of the collective, because that's the energy that you're expressing outwards, even if you're not saying a word. Remember the karma, the thoughts create the impact that you have. So we really have to walk our talk at this moment. And so many people are in the hope, living with the hope, living with the notion that there's some savior that's going to arise miraculously on the horizon, that there's some mythological force that's going to prevent all this from going wrong. And the fact that even we think that it's going wrong is also part of the questioning that we need to do. And that's not to say that there are not moral rights and wrongs. That's a different thing. I'm talking about in terms of our collective experience, which we have generated. So it can't be wrong because it's happening. We've generated it. So what could be wrong about that? Do we not like it? Well, then we need to question how we contribute to it. That's the thing. So don't wait for that savior. And Christ himself, the great savior that everybody refers to, Christ himself taught that what I can do, you can do and more. He said the temple lies within you. Don't go to the temple. Don't go away. Don't go and look for it in the temple. It's there. It's literally in what we call in English the temple. And all Latin languages use that expression, meaning that point where the pineal gland is, meaning where our mind is. That's the temple. At the temple, at the side of your forehead. That's the temple. Nowhere to go. Just close your eyes. Be there. Or don't close your eyes and be there as well. So symbolically, this is very Neptune in Aries. This is something that you want to understand. We can either be deluded and think that there's a knight in shining armor on a white horse, the Neptune in Aries delusion, which is there's going to be somebody coming and saving us. We already went through Pisces, and Pisces is also about either being a savior or waiting for a savior. And this is part of the growth curve and the learning, the spiritual learning of Pisces, to recognize that, oh, wait, I'm my savior. I'm the thing. I am already it. I am already connected to anything that will be my savior. This is the time now with Aries to recognize that there's no outer being, no individuated thing that's coming, but yet our individual actions and awareness of self and the truth of ourself is going to be the thing. So that symbolism of our spiritual journey being solitary, this is the truth of our spiritual journey. We don't need an intermediary to connect with who we already are. We don't need somebody to step in. We just need to plug in. We just need to be there. I am. I am. This is Aries. I am. How could I be wrong if I am? You see, the mere fact that we exist makes us worthy of living in the divine love that Neptune represents. This is the higher way of approaching Aries, rather the Neptune connection now to Aries for the next 14 years. I am worthy. I am. By definition, the fact that I am being breathed, the fact that I am having some force that is going through my body, that is animating my consciousness and making me aware, that awareness itself is enough to know that I'm worthy, that I am. And now what I'm going to do with that is up to me. How am I going to go forward with that? That's the Aries component that says I can also act. I can take action. Based on what? Based on either delusion or an awareness of my truth, Neptune. So Neptune is emerging from these Piscean waters that relate to the cosmic womb, the source of all life. So this is what Sanatana Dharma, the Indian tradition, which is now known more as Hinduism, but it wasn't a religion. It's just means a truth available to all, a collective truth. This is what it calls Hiranyagarbha. So that's the golden cosmic womb. And I love that image. We can absorb ourselves and surround ourselves with this notion, but also knowing that it's already in us. It's in us and it's surround us. It's the whole of what you might call the ether, the space that Neptune also represents. When I was first getting into yoga and Indian philosophy, that was the 80s, it wasn't really a big thing. So also no internet. So I had to kind of go in different directions and hope that I would be guided to teachers or people who knew better than me what the hell was going on, what life was all about, what is this, what is anything. And by the 90s, I started to participate more broadly, finding more people, finding better teachers, finding a place to understand better. And yet still in the 90s, 80s, 90s, even much later, people would poo-poo the idea of ether, or what is space, because science had discarded it as an idea. there are 4 elements, not 5. In the Indian way of looking at things, there's, you know, the water, air, earth, and air. So we see air because we see the wind and so on. But what is this space? What is this ether? The 5th element that all Indian wisdom talks about. And that 5th element is everything. It's literally everything. And when science started to understand better the composition of molecules, or when it became more, let's say, when it became more popularized, when it became more widely known outside of a smaller ring of quantum physicists, it became known that there's nothing that makes up an atom. So this thing called an atom has no substance, and you can go into quarks and all kinds of like really deep, deep, deep search for something, and there's nothing there. This is the ether. So as we're emerging from that, we are also that. That's this Maya. You see, that's the notion of the illusion that we are a separate self, the illusion that we are uniquely strong, firm, hard beings. The physical experience is like that. The 3-dimensional experience is like that. You can break your arm. You can struggle with different aspects of your health, for example. But it still doesn't make you separate from everything else, because we're not the appearance of all of this. So even with our eyes closed or open, we can experience this embrace, let's say, of this Hiranyagarbha, this cosmic womb, that is the cosmic light. The gold refers to the quality of the light that it is, and that is also the source of everything. It's the consciousness that is the source of everything. But what happens is that when we try this with our eyes open, or we get too deeply into imagining and into the sort of mentalization of the future and the dream world that is not simply connecting to source, then we start to go into this world appearing as something. That's the Maya, you see? Maya is the illusion of a separate thing appearing. So Maya is maybe something to really learn in this time with Neptune coming into Aries. How do I relate to Maya? And don't go to New Age understanding. Go to the source. Go to understanding through, this is slightly different understanding coming through, Vedanta, or coming through Sanatana Dharma. But either way, and even through Buddhism, there are nuances of differences in understanding that all lead to the same place. We know this world is not real. And so understanding that, it allows us to be less anxious and afraid, because we're always part of something that can never be separated. Where would we go? What are you going to separate from? You can't. Remember, that energy that is already you is beating your heart. Where are you going to go? And this is the delusional influence of Neptune that we need to keep in mind. We need to not fear it, but be aware of it, you see. So in Aries, we are symbolically born again, or reborn, or supposedly born. My teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, used to say, no birth, no death. That was a great teaching of his, no birth, no death. And so when somebody would have a birthday, he would ask us to say, Happy Continuation Day. Because we're just a continuation of things that have come before, and we'll continue into some new form in the next breath and into the future. So we just appear in Aries as a separate self. So because it's a Mars ruled sign, also Aries is representing courage. It's representing courage, which is where we find maybe the need to take action, or the impulse to take action, for example. And this word courage, it comes from the Latin word cor, and in French it would be courage, courage. And when the French find somebody is a little bit down, or a little bit nervous, a little bit afraid, or going through a hard time, they'll say courage, courage, or bon courage, just to encourage the person. And in English we would say take heart, but we don't really say that anymore. It's a shame. We need to say that again, because we also know how to help somebody to take heart. And so this is also Aries. It's finding that courage, finding the courage of understanding where we can go with our own sort of impulse. That's the other quality of Aries. The Aries is impulsive, but it doesn't mean that's wrong. The impulse can be coming from a place of knowing. It can be coming from this instinctive thing that says, my body's at risk, my life is at risk, I'm going to save my skin and I'm going to jump here, or I'm going to run away, or I'm going to hide here. That's the impulse that saves you. That's an instinct that is also linked to Aries. And sometimes the impulse is to jump in and grab a child who's running into the road, for example. That's also Aries. And so just understanding that impulse is not always wrong. It's what's behind the impulse. How am I working with these impulses? Is it overly emotional? Is it overly focused on the ego? Remember, the emotions are connected to ego, and that's not the truth of who we are. But if we can step back and analyze that, and take a lay of the land and see what's going on in my life in general. Where am I feeling something that I need to pay attention to so I don't act it out? Where am I worried and anxious to the extent that I'm actually becoming a burden to the people around me? Or that the people around me are also a part of my anxiety and my stress? Do I need to walk away from some people, walk away from some relationships and situations? So whenever Aries is experienced only through the ego, the notion of self becomes limited to this fragile and vulnerable, sort of, defensive, needing to defend itself being. We think we have to defend ourselves from something separate. That's, again, the illusion coming in. I think I'm separate, therefore everything else is separate from me, and therefore I can kill, or I can harm, I can label, I can other. So remember, like I said before, there's this life force that makes your heart beat, and it's beating my heart too. And it's beating the heart of every living being. It's the life force that runs through every living being, and even beings of so-called lower consciousness, different consciousness, that there's a life force that is animating all of it. So we tap into that as much as we can, and that is where we can find the depth of courage to keep going in the confusion, in everything that we're not sure of at this time. So we connect to that cosmic life force that we know that we are, reminding ourselves daily, ideally, sit down quietly and remind yourself, yes, I am all that. I am. I am is a full sentence. And just know that we're appearing as separate. We're appearing as these, like the tradition teaches, we're appearing as a separate wave in the ocean, but we are the ocean. We are a drop in the ocean. We just appear to be separate, but there's no way that a drop can exist without the ocean, or that a wave would even happen without the ocean, see? So that is definitely, archetypally this cycle between Pisces and Aries. And this is the cycle that we're straddling now for quite some time, the beginning of 2025. It's also going to be spilling over in that Neptunian Piscean way. It's spilling over into 2026. So we're still grappling with this newness in terms of the world around us. But we can, in that context, come to a deep understanding of who we are in the eternal self. Not following all the boats, not looking at all the boats bobbing up and down. We're here in this moment. And in this moment, I know who I am. And being in the eye of the storm, to use another metaphor, is the best place to be. The storm is not, it's not that you're ignoring the storm. It's not that you are saying, well, there is no storm, or I don't like the storm, go away, don't like you. It's that you're being it, that you're in the center of it. You are it, you see? There was a story, I saw a video of Greg Braden a little while ago, and it's from an old presentation that he did. And in that, he's talking about a friend who is a Native American, an Indigenous American, I think from the Southwest. I'm not sure, but I think it was from the Southwest, where he, I think, lives also. And there was a long drought. There was a real problem of drought at that time. And his friend said, do you want to come with me so I can call in the rain? And so Greg Braden, being the extraordinary curious soul that he is, I wish I had his chart. If anybody knows his birth details, I'd love to know. So he went along, and his friend just stepped away for a moment, looked into the sort of environment, sort of turning his back on Greg Braden, and he just was quiet for a moment. He said it was a very, very short while. He was expecting all kinds of things to go on. I don't know, like the sort of classical, comic book version of doing Indian powwow or something like that. And nothing of that sort happened. His friend turned around and he said, "Are you ready to go for lunch?" That was it. And Greg Braden said, "Sure, but I want to know, what did you just do?" And his friend said, "Well, I felt the rain. I felt the coolness of the rain. I felt the impact of the drops on my skin. I felt the wetness of my feet as I would walk through the muddy ground. I heard it, and I smelled it. I could smell that particular smell of rain coming. And I called in my ancestors as I was doing that." And according to Greg Braden, he said later on, as they were going towards lunch, all of a sudden these clouds rolled in and rain came. And I'm telling you this story simply because we often have it wrong in terms of calling in what we want, where we focus a lot on pushing away something and focusing on the wrong thing. We can point to what is wrong as a way of informing. That's still useful. It's not to say it's not. It's to say this is happening, and we need to take action on what's happening here because this is damaging socially or otherwise. But really, if we're looking from the personal perspective, which blends into the collective, we have to really be in what we already want and feel it and know that we are worthy of it. And this is the power of Neptune, not as a force of magical thinking or dreaming, but grounded in a knowing that there is some other force that is taking charge of everything, that it is not my little self doing this, you see? As a spiritual teacher, if you're doing healing work or if you're doing any kind of that sort of thing, it's important to ground yourself in that and stay, I'm going to use the word real, but I'm using that in more of a flippant sense because, of course, it's not, it's the small r real. Stay true to the knowing of who you are. And that doesn't require, again, vaunting and labeling, identifying with a particular role. Yeah, so just by connecting to that, we know that we already are that, just regularly, sitting in it and feeling it and bringing that to our awareness. And we then realize, oh, this is always where I'm getting my energy. It's always where I'm getting my influence, my understanding of self. It's always who I am. Recently, I did a session with a wonderful woman called Marisol. I'll put her link in the description box below. She's really wonderful. As a healer, she uses sounds and she uses the voice. And I've been struggling lately with my book project because I'm struggling. Cancer Rising, my 9th house, is publishing, and where everything is kind of challenged at the moment. And I've been struggling with how to evolve this book project where I'm not having any joy with the copyright holders to go ahead with the translation that I spent over 2 years writing. And so I'm reconfiguring the whole thing. I'm having to rethink it and redo the whole thing as part of my Mercury retrograde. And my whole, understanding of all of that felt like I was just being prevented from saying what I needed to say. And so when I went to Marisol, I said, look, this is where I feel stuck, my voice, my expression, what is blocking me from saying the things that I want. I was feeling I needed to be true to the original author, which I still feel I do, but my original way of doing that was through her words, just translated. And what I was starting to realize was that I needed to find my words and just transmit her work and this is what I'm working on now. And Marisol really helped me with that. So I'll put her link down below. I'm not affiliated. I just think she's wonderful, and it certainly helped me. And I'm just expressing this because it's part of this notion of, you know, where we hyper focus on an idea and don't see that big picture. I was focusing on the boats and not the water, for example. Focusing on that one boat that was chained to a giant anchor, and I was having trouble seeing that the waters were moving all around it. So yeah, that's it. We have to recognize that we are just a part of this bigger play of life that the Indians call, in Sanskrit, it's called lila. That's the play of the universe in all the different ways that you can extrapolate the word play, you know, meaning as literally a theatrical play. And we're playing all these roles, playing all these parts. But also it's playful. It's the joy of just this curiosity, which is very Aries. It's like, well, let's try this. Let's see how this goes. Let's see, well, whether this will work. So yeah, that notion that we're not the doer is very helpful to unblock, let's say, what feels stuck, and just recognizing that action is arising in the moment. Like the action in my just recent example was to contact Marisol and say, I need a session. And that's the action inspired by something. It's inspired by something that where there's a knowing. I know I just need to do this. And where will it lead? I don't know. I don't know that part, but I know that this is the thing that I need to do now. And that inspiration comes from somewhere that's not me micromanaging and planning every thought. I'm not creating every thought. It's exhausting enough to just have the thoughts and notice them, right? Can you imagine if we had to also anticipate them and create them? So no, that's not what's real, you see. So if we think we're a separate self and we're doing everything, it cuts us off from the knowing that we already are, and that sense of individuality or the individual consciousness is simply our awareness of this expression of life in this form. But we must always keep in mind that we are a very integral part of the greater whole, you know. And so if we focus too much on the individuated self, on the me, mine, my needs, etc., we're acting from ego, and that becomes more impulsive and selfish, even tinged with anger or resentment or hatred. You know, that ignorance causes us to believe that there can be another, that there is an other, and there is no other or others who are separate from ourselves. And that's because we're all united in consciousness. It's conscious, everything arises in consciousness. This is where it's important to distinguish the vocabulary that we use and just recognize that there is a you know, maybe in English, a limitation to the word consciousness, or even in other European languages at least, where the consciousness that the Indian tradition points to is everything. It's Brahman. Brahman is the greater consciousness. It's not Brahma, which is the Lord Brahma, which is the creator, but consciousness is what Brahma is within. You see, so there's different words, but the consciousness that often people are talking about is actually a mental attitude or an awareness of facts or an awareness of something. We always have to be conscious of something, of course, but often people use that term as I get to know more, I see more. And like that's where in modern times we hear so often the consciousness expanding. It's like, no, consciousness just is. It's always what it is. Our limited consciousness might be growing through awareness in terms of facts and ideas and an expansion of all that. But in terms of our actual life and the creative force of life, it's all happening in consciousness. So our individuated consciousness is the part that needs to expand into the awareness that we are already at. So the mind starts to go tilt after a certain point. Sorry, that's an old pinball expression for you young'uns there. Pinball is kind of like video games, but not. Yeah, so this is a bit of a ramble in a very Neptunian on Mercurian way at the 29th degree of Pisces. But this is my message here about this, you know, the cycle pump message, let's say, of Mercury that is retrograding back into Pisces and trying to communicate the message of the spirits, the message of the great universal truth to our more limited mind on the material level of thinking and thought and speech and communication. So this is the capacity to intuit and understand from the depths, and that's the birthing from Pisces into Aries. And this, it's an endless cycle. So we talk about the 29th degree of Pisces as the end of a zodiac, but it's the beginning as well. It's the Aries point. It's the endless beginnings of life itself. It describes the life cycle. So remember who you are, the cosmic spiritual being having a human experience, as the hippies used to say. And that's very true. It sounds trite again, but it's very true. It's what we are. We are having a human experience, having a limited moment in time in the lila, playing this role, wearing the uniform of this particular color, this particular hair color, or skin color, or size and shape, or so-called nationality, and so on. So Rabindranath Tagore, which was a fantastic being in his own right, was born with Neptune in Aries. He was born in 1861, so in the early degrees of Aries, just where we're approaching now. And he was a central inspirational influence on Indian independence, on that whole movement towards freeing themselves from British rule. And it's a very perfect description of Neptune in Aries. He really captured it in his words and in his way of being. He was also very close to Gandhi. It was him that gave the moniker of Mahatma. So we often know Gandhi by Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma means great soul, and it's kind of a neologism in his time. He called him great soul, and it takes one to know one, right? Like Tagore was truly a great soul. And in his writing, he reminded us that you can't cross the sea merely by staring at the water. That's such a great Neptune in Aries metaphor. So how perfect is that? And then another Neptune in Aries gem that he wrote reads, "Let me not pray to be sheltered from dangers, but to be fearless in facing them. Let me not beg for the stilling of my pain, but for the heart to conquer it." That's brilliant, isn't it? So I'm going to change gears a little bit here. So if you're feeling like you don't want to get into the day-to-day humdrum mundane stuff of Neptune in Aries historically, and where I think that might also repeat or rhyme in some minor way in the years ahead, you might want to jump ahead at this point and look at the all signs stuff. I'm just going to go really quickly through some aspects of Neptune in Aries from the 1860s and up to the mid-1870s, and just give you some elements, because of course remember that things are not the same this time. This is just a little indication of what might be there that is also resonant with what's here in our experience now. I am not going to focus on the United States. You've got enough people calling that in. But I want to point out that at the very end of the 1850s, there was a mutiny, so-called mutiny, from the British perspective, an uprising among Indians against the British East Asia, sorry, the East India Company. And the British East India Company was what established the British in India in the first place. And there was one from France, there was one from the Dutch as well, the Portuguese. Everybody got their fingers into the pie. The British more, let's say, so-called successfully or more impactfully, perhaps, as a colonial force. But they were abusive. This was a corporation. Now, keep this in mind. Where are we today? The corporations were abusing those people who were being maltreated and expected to work virtually in slave conditions and also as indentured laborers, as the British continued for decades, taking people far away, far away, like to the Caribbean, to other African places, from India, mainly from Gujarat, but other places as well, where it would take people away and force them to labor. It's very Neptune and Aries kind of energy. They were told that they would just have to pay off the debt and they'd be free. And of course, the debt was just never going to be paid off because they were paid slave wages. So slavery is it's a factor that is very much a part of this story. It's not the only part of this story, but it's worth noticing where issues around slavery just keep coming up with this particular theme. Like I said, they don't go away. They just become really obvious, really prominent with Neptune and Aries periods. So because the British East India Company was abolished after this brutal, massacre and the squashing of this uprising of the Indians who were trying to push their oppressor away, again, a theme today, the British government or the Crown took over. Not because they could care less about the Indians, but because they were losing some of their material investments were at risk of being lost. So they had to step in, again, not to save the Indians, remember, it's to step in to fight for their stuff, the delusion of ownership. And so this was a period of adjustment that all the way through the Neptune in Aries period eventually led to Victoria, Queen Victoria, being declared the Empress of India in 1876. So that whole transition from the East India Company towards a modern India, this period of time, the 1860s, is considered to be the beginning of modern India. This is the energy that Rabindranath Tagore is born into. It's also the energy that Swami Vivekananda was born into in 1863. He was, again, a very powerful spiritual force because it's because of him that the Indian spirituality, we'll call it, the Indian truth, knowing of Sanatana Dharma was shared with the West as he went to America. So that 1860s time also was the time when the US Civil War was ongoing. I'm, again, not going to really focus a lot on that at this time because there's so much else going on in the world. And let's keep in mind that the US population is 4% of the global population, so there are other stories that matter. And yet, it's also part of this bigger story because the Civil War in the US prevented cotton being exported, and the British were dependent on American cotton, through the legacy of slavery that just had the cotton trade directly between the US and Britain. And so because there was less cotton coming from there, they turned to the Indian subcontinent to get their cotton. And that became a whole new dynamic because it was at the same time, and this is also Neptune in Aries, when the Industrial Revolution was really taking off. And the old traditional way of weaving of an individual, say at a wooden framed weaving machine, became mechanized. And you had these huge machines doing the job of what other people were doing prior to that. Which decimated on another level the Indians who had been weavers. And then the cotton was taken from India, and rather than taking the time to have the Indians turn it into fabric and import the fabric, they just took the cotton, and in northern England, particularly in Birmingham, places like that, that is where they started to mill their own cotton and to weave their own cotton, and became extremely very, very wealthy because of that. But at the enormous expense to India, to Indians in general, and also because those Indians who were trading in cotton were also the victim of moneylenders who were really deceptive and were abusive, of course, profiting from the farmers of cotton, those who were trying to export, who needed to initially, plant the crops and therefore take loans against the planting of the crops and so on. This is all still happening today, but this was very specific to the Indian story in terms of the Raj, in terms of the British impact on India. So it led to just enormous debts. And this is also what led to the indentured laborers having to go abroad to pay off this debt, so-called. And of course, they never did. They were just sent abroad and uprooted from home and sent away. So this is the so-called modern India that emerges from this time. And of course, in Europe, the Industrial Revolution, which has an enormous cost because of the ignorance around our connectivity and the feeling that emerged prior to this time of the rational movement, the rationalization of facts and matter driving everything, that made the Industrial Revolution possible, and it just expanded incredibly rapidly with technological expanses and growth, and this nation state idea started to emerge also in that same period of time. And Germany was formed, Italy was formed, Hungary, all these states that were part of bigger empires, part of bigger states started to emerge in this time and call themselves a nation. And so the bureaucratic reforms, especially the German or Prussian way of organizing a country, which is very much attributed to Bismarck. That's what the current modern day nation state is based on. Bismarck became the minister president of Prussia, which is now called Germany, part of Germany, and he declared a direct rule in 1862. And he meaning that he would rule a bit like a dictator without a parliament, and this was the model of the nation state. So that's a very interesting thing, because there was a kind of an ongoing that model and the empirical model, or the sort of the royal model, it was in conflict with what was supposed to be a democratic model. So the 1870s were also, at the very beginning, 1871, there was a Franco-Prussian war, which was defining for Europe. It was Napoleon's undoing, and Napoleon III led to the collapse of his empire, his exile to Elba, and this war. Sorry, no, that's his son. That was Napoleon, first one that was exiled. So his son came back with a vengeance. And in the 1870s, after there was a frustration, a mob uprising against all of this loss and devastation because of the Franco-Prussian War that the Prussians won, and therefore really caused enormous harm to the French, and even led to starvation and real oppression in places like Paris. The mob uprisings, which were known as the Paris Commune, because it was this communal effort, the people coming together and agreeing to fight this greater nefarious force. It failed and caused an incredible rift in society. So this is another thing that shows up again and again with Neptune in Aries. There's a oppressiveness and a rift. Again, there are other influences as well, but we're certainly moving into those influences that would indicate similar things in our times now. So there was a struggle for power that led to elections in France that eventually led to the Third Republic. So the quality of the French Third Republic was based in this Neptunian or Aries energy, which is a feeling of disillusionment or disappointment in the way that people were governed and ruled, and the use of force and so on. That's also very Neptune in Aries. Neptune represents disillusionment, disappointment, all the dysfunctional ways of feeling. It can, in that sense of having this vision, as I said earlier, of a savior. Somebody's going to come and rescue us, and now what? And so this is definitely something to pay attention to now. Who's my savior? Who do I think is going to be the hero of the day? And who, 24 hours later, do I hate? Because I still believe that I'm separate and they are too, and that there's a savior out there that's going to fix it all. So this became very important. In France, at least, it was a reflection of the constitutional structure of government, which was very different to the Bismarck vision and the Prussian way of governing. But that constitutional structure of government actually started to become much more the norm, and it blended very much with the Bismarck notion of the intensity around bureaucracy and the power of bureaucracy. But again, blending is the key word there, which is also a Neptune word. Spain was an exception to that. Spain was grappling with the monarchy and with fascism, which was very much a story of Spain in the last part of the 19th century, and certainly into the first 75 years of the 20th century. And it's still, I'm here in Spain, and it still influences the way people behave, especially the older people. It's quite interesting to see how these things seep into cultural behavior and social behavior in the ways that they were educated as children. So socialism in general was a very big popular concept in the 1860s, and largely that was coming from a concern from the brutality of capitalism. Capitalism that started almost with the inception of the British East Asia Company. You know, that was all the charters that were given in the 1600s for commerce to go and ravage and take whatever it wanted around the world. That's the beginning of capitalism. And here we're seeing an aspect of the kind of a rejection of that as Neptune is in Aries. And there's a new vision. Remember, Aries also is the first sign of the zodiac. Everything's about being new and different and unique in this moment in time. It's creating something. And here, if I can say something maybe more positive, is that, you know, just like Buckminster Fuller said, we can't improve on something that's flawed. We have to step outside of it, and I'm heavily paraphrasing this. We have to step outside of the energy of this dysfunctional paradigm and create a new paradigm. This is also the vision of Neptune in Aries, which is about creating this new paradigm. And that, of course, along with all the other astrological influences, is part of this moment as well. Which direction that takes is up to the collective. So how we contribute to the collective is very important, very significant. So yeah, if I come back to the socialist thing, then of course that is also implying a revolution. A revolution becomes essential, and that's also the Aries influence. I need this to change based on what I want. And that revolutionary influence was very much influenced by Karl Marx, who was a very strong impulse at the time, very, very effective thinker, new ways of recognizing the dangers of capitalism. And now that cues the Americans in the comment section to tell me how awful socialism is, and it's exactly the same as communism. And I would just say, please research before commenting. And also, this is not advocating for one or another worldview. This is just me explaining the Neptune and Aries historical thing. So you have been programmed, which is also Neptune, propagandized to have this Pavlovian response to the word socialism and communism. That's part of your programming, and that's something that could also be explored. It would be worth exploring that. Is that your original thought, or have you been had you grown up with that? This is a good time to recognize where have I been propagandized in my life, and who tells me what to think. So here, that of course brings me to the US again in terms of the Civil War, and because the issue of slavery again was very, very much part of the contention. That was a very big picture, a very big part of the 1860s for the United States. But I want to emphasize here that that issue was never fully resolved, and that's also Neptune, where there's a belief that this is changing, this is happening, but actually, did it change? You know, like when Abe Lincoln took office in 1861, you know, like really emphasizing this Neptune and Aries energy. He takes office, and initially he says he won't interfere with slavery. But then the southern states freak out. They're panicking because they don't trust that, and they want to keep their slaves, and they need that to stay economically powerful. And so they decide, some of them decide to secede. They want to fight to have their own sovereignty. And so essentially the question there was money again. Again, we want to really wake up to the idea that there's some honorable force that is fighting for humanity. It's mostly about money, and that's part of the Neptunian delusion as well. And of course, individuals were very much recognizing the need to stand up for humanity, just as we are today, just as people scream against thunder to point out genocides in various countries, and it's just ignored because money is really the big issue, it's the main issue. So the question was, who will take over the federal forts? Because, of course, the states have independent laws and their independence around how they govern themselves. And who will take over the federal forts was really a big question of what triggered the fighting. So the slavery issue initially was not really the reason. It's one of the reasons, especially was emphasized later on. But again, this is politics, right? Nothing more Neptunian than politics. So, and also at the same time, in 1861, Tsar Alexander II emancipated Russia's serfs. But and serf is another way of saying, peasant. People who are eking their way through, eking their way through life, eking out a living, eking out enough to put food on the table, etc. And again, that's not entirely, it wasn't lasting. This is the Neptunian delusion that, oh, it's fixed now. It's all fixed, just like with slavery. Slavery morphed, not just American slavery, but around the world. Slavery became overcrowded prisons, where the prison labor was used, for next to nothing, pennies a day, $1 a day. We saw that recently with the California fires. The prisoners, for something like $1 a day, were going to fight these fires, putting their life on the line, basically. So that's modern day slavery. Modern day slavery definitely exists. It's definitely gone underground, but it's there for children, women. So many of these things are still there. And so the Neptune and Aries aspect I want you to keep in mind is all the things that you think are changing, and are they really? Even just decades following the so-called suppression of slavery, the freeing of the slaves, the Jim Crow laws came into effect in southern states, just basically continuing that. And even in the 60s, the civil rights movement that also sprang from that, the oppression. We're still, people of color, the Black Americans, were still denied their basic rights in so many ways. Not even being able to go to school or sit at a cafeteria counter and have their breakfast with other people, denials of mortgages and education, and the disproportionate arrests of Black people compared to anyone else, which just populates the prison system, which currently, in the last few decades, is a private sector function, so it makes profits. Prison system is very profitable, so it's modern day slavery. So again, just to keep these things in mind, these notions of revolution and big change and all these glorious things, and it's behind the clouds of Neptune, it's behind the sort of misty veil of what we think is true. And in the 1860s and into the 1870s was also considered to be the Gilded Age. And Mark Twain came up with that expression. And what it means, gilded means it's not solid. It's not solid gold. It's not real gold. It's gold on the surface. It's fake gold. You can have a gilded mirror, for example, but it's made of wood, or it's made of whatever plaster, but it's painted gold. That's a gilded mirror. And so the Gilded Age was the prescient observation of Mark Twain, who pointed out to the situation of the massive wealth disparities, which were also pointed out by other authors, like Victor Hugo, who did Les Miserables in the same time, in the same era. And you also had, well, of course, Mark Twain himself, and John Stuart Mill, who wrote about the subjugation of women and the oppression of women, the Jane Austen writing about the condition of women, and you know, the children's rights were evoked in Les Miserables, but also in Dickens' work. Charles Dickens also wrote in this era, Neptune in Aries. It had a huge impact on social mores and leading to change due to an increase of, you know, the Neptunian compassion and an understanding of the needs of children, and the damage that that does to society in general. You know, all these things have a deep impact. Although it's about the individual Aries and the individual rights, the impact is social, because remember, we're not separate from anything. And so our individual self is having a deep impact on society. So that massive disparity between rich and poor sounds familiar, doesn't it? It sounds really, really urgent. You know, that many of the tycoons who had just more money than they knew what to do with were slum landlords. They were horrible people, and later on they turned to philanthropy as a way of disguising the things that were so horrible about the way that they conducted their business. You know, another example of that would be Alfred Nobel, who was a Swedish scientist, and he invented dynamite basically by realizing how he could make it portable, make some explosive devices more portable, and allowing them to be used more safely, let's say, by being triggered by fire. That's very Aries as well, isn't it? Exploding things. And so the thing to know about that in terms of this Neptune in Aries, and that is connected, by the way, to the Neptune in Aries, that invention of dynamite, that is where, because dynamite was causing so much harm, and because it was recognized as such a deeply toxic and traumatizing force, that's what impelled him to create the Nobel Prize, prizes for science and peace and medicine and mathematics and so on. So it's about that Neptunian desire to mask and cover up and create an illusion around something. I'm going to pretend that I'm super generous. And this is what all the oligarchs did. This is what all the wealthy robber barons did. They gave money as philanthropists. We're seeing this again. It's still happening. And so, yeah, this is something to keep in mind. It's not, things are not what they seem. It's really one of the things to keep in mind. Certainly that's part of the overall Neptune sextile Pluto, which I attribute to the whole propaganda era that we're in for the last century. So, yeah, the Gilded Age is definitely, I think, something to keep in mind, where things are not as they appear. This building massive things that are actually personal wealth. It's personal wealth that is expanding, and what do we do with that, and how does that impact us? Now, that's already, of course, occurring in our modern times. It's a continuation of all that centuries of capitalism and the impact that that has on society. And we're grappling with that now. We're in that period. So who is going to be the Victor Hugo of our times, or who's going to be the Mark Twain, or the you know, or in any event, you know, who's going to just point out the peak abuse of power that is going on, this personal abuse of power, and do something about it in a way that can shift things, you see? So bringing awareness to that. So these diluted values persisted in Europe's growing, became known as the scramble for Africa, which started in this period. It really took off in the Neptune in Taurus period, where, you know, there was a conference even in Belgium. I lived in Belgium for 34 years, still do technically, and King Leopold hosted a conference of all the European colonial powers, and basically they sat there with their compasses and their pens and papers and divided up Africa amongst themselves. You know, so this is what was called the scramble for Africa. it was diluted values that were driving them to do this. And um, the Darwin, his Origin of the Species was written at the end of 1859. And so became more public in 1860, just as Neptune was coming into Aries. And that term Darwinism was coined in 1861, in March 1861, in a review of that paper. And Darwinism is a term that we know still today, which is widely used, especially already widely used by the late 1860s and 1870s. And it really did tie in or lead to or underpin the concept of eugenics, meaning good genes, having, breeding for good genes, basically. That's a term that came in 1883, that came later, but it definitely was the dream of it emerged through the Neptune in Aries. Who is a self? What is the ideal self? Neptune in Aries. So lots and lots of things that are still impacting us now, like all these different aspects of colonization that include like the gold rush, for example, which really ended up completing Canada, if you like, when British Columbia was impacted by the gold rush of the 1860s, where people would come, and in Oregon, same thing, but BC was was actually only later made part of Canada, and Canada itself established itself in 1867, and that was partly because from sea to sea now Canada was actually a unified force. There was no so-called border, and that again pushed Indigenous people away, causing enormous social disruption, enormous pain. And this is that again, Aries is about desire and goals and so on, but that can also lead to selfishness, as we saw, and then greed as well. So these are qualities that if we're not really understanding the truth of our nature, we're going to push for, right? So this is definitely, part of the delusion, for example, of the eugenics movement or whatever else that says, oh, well, I'm going to do it my way. I understand what is the best thing or the only way, for example. Yeah, and then there's a figure called Charles Davenport, who was an American born in 1866. So right peak Neptune in Aries. And he was a leading eugenicist. He was one of the people who really created that global movement, which later on inspired Nazism. So Nazism was inspired by this American idea of eugenics that became popularized throughout the world, especially because of this influential speaker, Charles Davenport, who was really focused on the superiority of the race and selecting for that, genetically selecting for that. And this was, of course, a justification, again, an illusion, a delusion of motives, because it was a justification for capitalism and for the abuse of other human beings, or the abuse of nature, for that matter, and of all natural forces. And of course, that inspiration leading to Nazism, which means National Socialism. So again, we have that influence of socialism, this notion of socialism based on a national idea, national identity, that originated in Neptune and Aries in the 1860s. But in the same way, Theodor Herzl, who was the founder of Zionism, and again, a really huge advocate of that, he was born on the 2nd of May, 1860, and he was named, so, he's literally the individual named by the Israeli Declaration of Independence. So it's still there, still modern, still a reference. And I quote, "He is the spiritual father of the Jewish state." And this is the Neptune in Aries impact. And here I'd really encourage you to refer to a book by an amazing journalist called Isabel Wilkerson, and the book is called Caste. And there is a subtitle to it, and I can't remember it, but Caste is, for me, a must read. It was probably 4 or 5 years ago that it came out. an excellent book, and it's really worth reading. And certainly, if you have children, really, really important to read that book and understand the importance of caste and how it's used today and how we operate as human beings on that level unconsciously. So that would be a really helpful adjunct if you're interested in these kinds of things, right? And then I'll wrap up maybe the historical look at this with a sense of what was going on in China, where in the 1860s they had just ended the Second Opium War, which was basically the US and UK, particularly the UK, but also with the US and France and Russia, all opposing China, and for various degrees over territory or over the opium trade, which was deliberately provoked in the First Opium War. And if ever you want to understand how the world can be in the state that it's in today and how these great powers operate, you can read the history of the Opium Wars. It's pretty eye-opening stuff. So that's, caused the loss of territory. So territorial borders, like I already suggested in terms of European nation building and African, the division of Africa, for example, territorial borders are part of the Neptune in Aries story. And it was no different for China because they lost some territory to Russia. And that was the far, far east of Russia, which is today Vladivostok. And so these were based on treaties that were unfair. You could call them unfair, what are known as unequal treaties. It's punitive in a way. We've seen punitive treaties and how they don't work, how they end up backfiring in a big way. And of course, that the effects of the opium, deliberately provoking addiction, and note again the resonance with today, deliberately provoking an addiction to opium in order to overcome and overpower China, had enormous consequences for China socially and economically, that of course lingered for generations. It was a humiliation. It was millions of lives lost during the war, and as a result of the opium addiction, the Chinese were humiliated and they felt extremely vulnerable. And that caused a social rift, a really big political rift, where the conservative sort of Confucian ideas were challenged by those in China who wanted to modernize and become more westernized, become more like the West and adopt their Western ways. And, that's brought us to where we are. Yeah, I think I'm just checking my notes to see if there's something I missed. One interesting little tidbit here, which is very Neptune in Aries, is that camouflage was used by the British in their colonial war in what is now called Ghana, where they were taking over the land of this big strip of land on the coast, which is called Ghana today. They used camouflage for the first time in 1874, which is super Neptune, disguising the illusion, something that's creating an illusion of something in wartime. And that's, previously the British wore red coats. That was how everybody knew it was the British. And the opposing team would be blue and the British were red. And those were the days when there were sort of rules of engagement in war. And Neptune in Aries was the time when those rules started to be broken down, and what you might describe as guerrilla warfare started. And then also there was the invention of the light bulb in Canada. A little shout out to Canada in 1875, and Thomas Edison took over the patent and bought the patent, and of course became quite influential as a result. And of course, there's the heat and fire and light of Aries, and illumination through the magic, which is the electricity needed to generate the light in the light bulb. And that's very Neptunian as well. So I don't want to beleaguer this point. It is a lot. This is the, wait, one more thing. It's at the bottom of my list, which is really very Neptune in Aries, which is in 1870, a doctor discovered, I think he was German. I didn't notice where it was. I think he was a German doctor. Discovered that sterilization of medical instruments, something we take for granted today, when it was before they were used in surgery, they would fight against bacteria. And so Neptune, of course, is airborne diseases and things that we can't see that are causing illness, including, by the way, psychosomatic things. And so that's a really interesting dynamic because that is showing up as a Neptune and Aries thing in this fight against bacteria and sterilizing medical instruments. So I'm going to leave it there, and I just want to switch over now to the sign by sign. And so I'll just check out the Aries sign. Sorry, actually, before we jump into Aries, I just want you to have a look at this chart, which is incredible for an inception chart. Remember that an inception chart is kind of like a birth chart for an event. And so it imprints on the event. It's something that is like the essence, let's say, of what we could expect in this event. Just like if I'm looking at your natal chart, but you might be 65 years old, I can still describe your life and your experience of your family and your lineage and what's going on in your life today based on that imprint, that moment in time. And so this is Neptune as it first arrives into Aries. Of course, there will be another inception chart for January next year, January 26th of 2026. But this is the first time. And this is also the pure essence of Neptune moving into Aries on its own without Saturn, because the next time it moves in, Saturn is very, very close behind. Although maybe it also gets a bit of a reprieve for a couple of weeks. Yeah. So anyway, this is the first time that Neptune goes into Aries. And we have a number of things I just want to point out. And I've kept the details of the ascendant and the midheaven simply because I found them really speaking loudly to this moment in time. Sometimes I take that away when I'm doing a full moon chart, for example, because it's just distracting. And this is not a personal chart, but I want you to see it from the perspective of the 30th of March in universal time, almost 1 p.m. of what is technically British time, so-called Greenwich Mean Time. But I do this because this is the original meridian, the time meridian that everyone relies on to calculate their own time. So this is kind of a universal influence. And so it's why it's known as universal time. And so here we have an ascendant in Leo. And it's very interesting to see where the ruler of the ascendant is and what's the dignity of the ruler of the ascendant. And here we have it. The sun is exalted on the midheaven and in the ninth house, which is the joy of the sun. So again, this is emphasizing the individual and the need, the admonition for the individual to take responsibility for their behavior, to do something that is uniquely in their capacity to take action on, and to come from ninth house quality, the higher mind. Perhaps I'll give this to Leo as their own ruler, as their own meaning, because this is genuinely going to be very powerful for Leo. And so, yeah, let's do it. This is Leo, Sun, Moon, and Rising, as well as the inception chart for Neptune. And so this meaning here is really, really powerful. What can I do? How can I lead? How can I show the way? How can I be a beacon of light coming from higher wisdom and understanding my purpose, my solar purpose? Now, again, this applies to everyone as regards the Neptune, the quality of Neptune, but this is very specific to Leo. And now part of the dynamic here with the moon in Aries will be to question and uncover any emotional selfishness or sense of selfishness or sense of impatience that makes you act from impulse or emotionally, especially as the moon itself is with Chiron, where there can be a feeling of needing more attention, needing more, not feeling your value, let's say. And then, of course, the moon is with Eris, where we are feeling not seen or feeling disrespected or not taken seriously in life or not honored, where we can sow chaos or where we can point out hypocrisy or even live with hypocrisy, live through hypocrisy. When we're only pointing fingers of blame. So it's a really interesting thing that this is speaking out to. And then all of that is semi-sextile in Uranus, which is not a comfortable energy. in general, semi-sextile is where adjustment is required, but it's hard to grapple with what that is. So this again reflects on a deep unconscious motivation, which we also see because Mars, which is ruling that ninth house, is in the 12th house of the unconscious and very, very emotional. And it's in a square to that moon in what we call a mutual reception. So there's a mitigation to that. It helps, those planets help each other out, but it still requires an understanding of what's behind the veil. Like what's going on inside? What do I have faith in? What do I believe in? How do I act upon my faith? That's very ninth house Aries. How do I act upon my belief, my sense of what is true, what is important? This is, of course, where we find the Neptune, and this will be the story going forward. We also have Saturn in the eighth house, which is also about secrets and things that we need to uncover psychologically or coming from the places where we are afraid to look, the taboo things. And that's also where we find Mercury and Venus retrograding right on top of the North Node. So this is the moment in time where a lot of deep reflection is necessary, a lot of understanding of what operates us from beneath the conscious level, but also what operates us based on what we could call family baggage or family karma, or our collective karma, collective human karma. What are we having to grapple with today? How do we take action once we've understood the impact of all the stuff that's gone before? Am I still acting out based on what happened to my grandparents? Am I still acting out based on trauma that I haven't become aware of yet? Either my own individual one or the collective trauma that we are living in. And again, I want to emphasize it would be really, at this time, there's so many books, but the book by Isabel Wilkerson called Caste is really, really interesting to explore all these ideas. Yeah. So, and then I also want to point out that Saturn is sextiling Neptune. So there's a semi-sextile from the moon to Saturn, which can feel depressing, can feel heavy. Same with the Chiron building up to the semi-sextile. But the Uranus sextile that Saturn is building up to, it's partile, it's almost perfected, is all about this desire to go from the what is the here and now, or the burden or the collective feeling or this individual feeling of stuckness, and changing things up. And what is changing is based on our values. It's based on the things that we know we need, whether those be the physical things that we need in the form of food or financial security or relational security, or the aspects of what drives me in terms of my values, which is such a big part of the story of the ninth house, and where Venus also stationed, which, by the way, was pretty much at the point where the sun is on the midheaven. Like, you just can't make this stuff up. It's just amazing. So Neptune this is the quality of Neptune now going into Aries, based on everything I've already said about the Neptune. And then we also have Pluto, which is on the descendant, which suggests that there's a real urgent change that is required in terms of our relating and how we relate, and what is the impulse of relationship. And this Pluto is about to be sextiled by that Neptune. Now, again, that's a sextile that has been holding for many, many, many decades, a century or so, and it will continue to hold for a little while, a couple of years. But that Pluto-Neptune energy can also be about who has the influence over me in terms of what I think I know, what I think I believe, who told me that, and was that a part of the propaganda, which is so insidious that I don't know it exists, that it's in my films and in my music and in my cultural references and in my religious beliefs and in the way I'm manipulated based on how media operates, based on how the government lies directly or by omission, etc. And I'm applying this across the board, but it's especially with reference to the influence of the United States, both domestically as well as globally, right? Right. And then also, it just with a reference again collectively, but also specifically to you, Leo, because I'm just combining these two because this video is extremely long. This is part of the bigger reference of this spirituality, which is linked to Neptune as well, and also potential for teachers who are, in or out of their integrity. That's, of course, an ongoing issue, but it's definitely something to pay attention to. So Madame Blavatsky is one of the ones that comes to mind, because she was The Theosophical Society started exactly at the end of the Neptune in Aries cycle in 1875, and she was doubted even by her followers in terms of her sincerity and her um, genuineness. For example, I think we're going to find a lot of people are definitely becoming more intuitive, becoming more psychic, becoming more in their, available, let's say, to what is out there. And certainly we already through the Neptune in Pisces have become very, very linked to the notion of spiritualism, just as it was in Neptune in Aries before, being an impact on our well-being or our lives, and what do we believe. Issues around UFOs have replaced issues around spirits and ghosts from the 19th century. But all of those things are very much alive in our moment. And the question is, what place are they operating from? What is the original intention? And what is the likely outcome based on that original intention? So Jupiter is a bit of a wild card here. It is ruling that 8th house where Mercury and Venus and the North Node and Saturn are all found. And it's also in what's called a mutual generosity between Mercury and Jupiter, which rules Jupiter, and Jupiter rules Mercury at this time. So there's a big tie-in here between our vision for the future, the sense of what we want to prioritize going forward, and what we understand based on this inner motivation or an inner desire or our connection to our spiritual intimacy or our personal intimacy, and including an awareness of trauma, awareness of secrets, awareness of things that can disturb our peace. But that is hopeful. It's Jupiter in Gemini, which is very social, very cheerful. It's leading us ideally. And again, I emphasize the word ideally because of that full 9th house, as well as the Piscean influence and the Jupiterian influence in the 11th. With idealism, or ideally, it is leading us to a better place. And all we can do, remember, is to control what it is that we are doing and how we contribute to that. All right, so I'm going to keep going from Leo. There's you, Leo. You, again, why not? Because Leo is all about being seen, and there you are, seen as a representation, as a stand-in for the collective. How much better can it get? All right, here we're going to go from Leo to Virgo. And for Virgo, sun, moon, or ascendant sign, this Neptune ingress is in your 8th house, which is very mystical, very much about occult knowledge and understanding spiritual things. For me, when Neptune went through my 8th house, which is many, many years ago now, but it definitely woke me up to my deeper spiritual self. And it also connected me much more to the life and death quality of life, like this, like almost urgency around the life and death quality of things. And also within relational things, it's helpful to remember Neptune in the 8th can bring both romanticism and higher ideas of what a relationship can be, but also deception, disappointment, and disillusionment. And that can also come from issues around money, other people's money, what might happen if you're not careful, if you're not paying attention to how you're using money, or how money comes through you, or how money comes to you. And so this is a big part of the Neptune journey for you. I'm going to come back again and again, and especially when Saturn comes in with Neptune, and we will talk about this again. I just want this to be a short and sweet pointer as to where this is all happening for you. And your ruler, Mercury, is retrograde at this time, connected to this Neptune. So it's really somehow you're very deeply tied into this moment in time, especially as the South Node is also in your sign. So there's a way of being in that Virgoan identity, or that sense of identity around what might feel like your preferences or your criticisms or your assessment of things. There's a difference between being discerning, which is the higher version of Virgo, where you recognize what is useful and good and appropriate for this moment, and being judgmental or criticizing from a personal place. Just as I said in the introduction, that egoic sense can block us to the greater good. But Mercury is going to be a fair bit of time retrograding for a whole week after this ingress, and it comes together again with Venus and the North Node in opposition to the South Node in your signs. Very, very personal to you, this whole story of the Neptune ingress. And so there's maybe a bigger question around values in general. Venus rules your second house of money, and of course Mercury is your ascendant sun or moon ruler. And so this can be all those things about relational stuff, about money stuff, about values as well. Coming in as the Neptune goes into the 8th house, this is an opportunity for you to take off any rose-colored glasses that you unconsciously know are there. And if you have red flags at any stage in your relationship, or in terms of money, or in terms of work, or things that are happening behind the scenes, then listen to those, pay attention to those red flags, pay close attention, and trust your gut. Right, I'm going to leave it there. There's a lot more to say that I'll be covering in future videos. So good luck with that, Virgo, and I'll see you very soon. And Libra, this is happening in your relationship sector. So this is huge for Librans as well, because also Venus is retrograding and connecting to Mercury, which is both of which are very strongly connected to this Neptune. And the North Node features in all of this as well. We're going in a new direction, going in a very, very new direction. With reference to your quality of being, because it's Venus that represents you, as well as your quality of relationships. And it's in terms of the 6th house, your vision for your work and everyday life is changing, because now Neptune has shifted from that 6th house and is going into the 7th house. Now at this point, you also want to pay attention to relational issues where you might be overgiving, or doing something that sacrifices an aspect of yourself, or that is overly optimistic. You know, there's often a lot of people talk about things like twin flames and soul mates and all those things. And honestly, if I can give you one word of advice, if you are one of those people who fantasizes about the twin flame soulmate as being all good and wonderful and love hunky-dory, notice that sometimes those so-called soulmates, or those people that are karmic in our lives, are the people we need to take the lesson quickly and run from, and not, you know, really, really listen to your intuition. This is the advice of the moment. So Neptune can color your sense of who is in front of you, who's across the table from you. And this is a time where you really want to contemplate very quickly what is the motive behind this relationship? What is my motivation? And what is their motivation? And am I going through a desire for a relationship that can be so strong, which is true often for Virgo? There's a real strong impulse for a relationship. Is this impulse so strong that I'm willing to compromise or sacrifice something of myself and overlook the red flags? So this can also bring you a relationship that's very romantic and very spiritual. This is another way of experiencing the same Neptune, but I would give this a few months and go slowly in the relationship and really observe, not in a way that needs to be suspicious, but in a way that is discerning. Who is across the table from me? What is going on in this person's life? And am I seen by them as their rescuer? Am I the one that they expect to be rescued by? Or am I looking for that role as a way of justifying myself and feeling welcome, feeling wanted? All right, just some thoughts for Libra. If you are a business person, also, by the way, Neptune in the 7th, very important to keep in mind what's going on financially and in business partnerships, for the same reason as you might in a personal partnership. It can also, by the way, bring you some fantastic dynamics around what you might describe as spiritual friends, or people that you become more connected to because you're sharing a spiritual ideology. So that can also grow as well, especially because Jupiter's in the 9th for you right now, bringing perhaps spiritual teachers and guides into your life. Right, so good luck with that, Libra, and I'll see you in the next video. And Scorpio, I'm just going to take away Scorpio. Hang on, just give me a second. I'm going to take away all of the angles because it's no longer necessary for us. Scorpio, Sun, Moon, and Ascendant. This ingress of Neptune is happening in your sixth house of everyday work and health and obstacles. So it's a really helpful time for you to recognize how your work is affecting your health, or whatever health issues might be coming that are requiring your attention, and that also can include things that feel vague, that feel like things that you don't really know how to grapple with, that feel like things that are happening because perhaps there's an element of psychosomatic illness that's creeping in. Often with Neptune in the sixth, there can be anxieties or challenges. This is also the Neptune in Aries dynamic around that, where there can be things around illness that are actually coming from our mental or emotional situation, and not coming from an outer thing. Like, for example, it's not an accident, but it's, which some people argue are also coming from an unconscious resonance. But nonetheless, it's something that is, let's say, preventable if you become aware of the way that you're thinking, and also aware of your tie-in with your job. Now, your ruler is up in the ninth house of purpose and your higher thinking and the way that you see your reason for being here, and your guiding philosophy, you could call it, or your belief, your faith. And this is running your sixth house. It's that Mars that's in charge of your sixth house. And that's where you want to really put in a lot of questioning, a lot of consideration, perhaps especially now, as Neptune and Saturn will both be dancing just in from the fifth into the sixth house, and saying, how do I express myself every day? Is that making me feel like myself? Is it feeling more like me, or is it a burden? Is it struggle, nonstop dissatisfaction? And a great opportunity for you to look at all of those things. I've done lots of videos, by the way, also tying in the eclipses, and which will give you more information about this. Like here, I just really wanted to point out the basic thing to focus on. With Neptune in the sixth, there can also be an unconscious or even a conscious avoidance of responsibility, a desire not to have to take on the heat. So that also is one of the reasons why the unconscious can create illness, because if I'm sick, it's a socially acceptable way of not working or getting discharged from responsibilities or just tuning out. And that's, of course, the negative quality of Neptune, but it can cause some real serious, a need for serious questioning, let's say. Neptune in the sixth can also spiritualize your everyday life. If you're living from a place of a more awareness and consciousness, from an intentional place, let's say, it can very much spiritualize your life and have you living through a quality of life that is more in connection with your soul and spirit. And Mars in the ninth has for the last 7 months, basically at this point, been showing you how you want to express yourself out in the world through what you have faith in, what you believe in, and maybe be a source of guidance and leadership in all of that. That's an Aries quality, as well as a Mars quality in general, which is Mars is your ruler. Right. So that's Scorpio. You'll hear a lot more from me in future videos about these different aspects of Neptune, but that's just a thing to keep in mind. Sagittarius, Neptune is entering into your fifth house, which is trinal to you. Very fortunate, very, very nice, just like with Leo, which we saw in the overview. Do watch that, even though it's also for Leo. That trinal quality to you is very supportive, very inspiring, creative. We could describe it as lucky. Again, it depends on your natal chart. But with Neptune moving into the fifth house, you can become immensely creative. You can find a lot of just inspiration coming out of nowhere. Because it's in Aries, be careful of and that's also part of your quality, Sagittarius, as you're ruled by Jupiter, and Jupiter currently is in Gemini, ideas popping like popcorn. You might have all kinds of ideas, but not have the momentum to keep them up and to act through right till the conclusion. So if you keep that in mind, you can either, write things down, take note of all these ideas, and either act on them later, or give them to other people to act upon, to say, here, look, I thought about this, but you can probably do it. You might take this and run with it, for example, and expand your sense of what is coming through you, you being the conduit and not necessarily having to be the one that is acknowledged for doing the thing. As much as you like that acknowledgement, because of course Mars, Aries is your fifth house of self-expression, so you do like to be a standout, but you can, with Neptune there, you can try and do this in a new way. Neptune in the fifth can also affect your relationship with your children. There can be either some impact on your children's life if you already have children, a deeper bonding with them, a deeper merging with them. But of course, keep in mind, Neptune also has the quality of disillusionment, delusion and drug use and substance abuse and so on. And so both for yourself, because the trine from the fifth to the first can have a self-indulgent quality, but also for your children. If your children or students, if you're a teacher, for example, pay attention to their behavior and help with anything that has to do with substance abuse that might be there as well. The Neptune in the fifth is fantastic for creative inspiration and imagination. And this is something that you can actually work with to heal yourself, and working through a process of self-awareness, like something like, for example, art therapy, or different types of creative therapy, different types of creative expression as a way of understanding you. This is a really great time to do that. So good luck with that, Sag, and I will speak to you again many, many times about Neptune and Aries in future videos. Capricorn, this ingress is happening in your fourth house of home and land, property, family, your family of origin, your connection to your emotional nature and your psychological foundation, or your emotional foundation in life. And this is an opportunity for you to see differently around all of those things, have a more perhaps compassionate relationship to yourself, but also to your ancestors, to your family, to the people that you live with. Be careful on the physical level, on the level of land and property and so on, that you're aware of anything that's going on in terms of contractual agreements with a purchase, for example, or a rental agreement, or something that you're doing around property. If there's a newness, a new home or a new project that you have to do, there can be something that goes wrong, and it can be something based on what you're not seeing clearly, but you know that you already know. This is the thing. You need to trust your instincts. We've got Saturn in the third house of the mind, so it's helping at this stage try to cut its way through the fog for you, and get serious about the way you're thinking and analyzing contracts or analyzing agreements, sticking with agreements. It also works both ways. This is something that you need to act upon with integrity, with Neptune in the fourth. You might be unclear about your psychological or emotional grounding or motivations, what drives me. And because of that lack of clarity, you might do things that you later regret, or that you wouldn't have done if you had really thought them through. Or again, it's about potentially acting on impulse, acting in ways that part of you knows you're going to pay a price for, and there's another part of you that says it'll all work out, it's all good. So yeah, these are a variety of different ways that can show up. Neptune is also opposing, of course, your 10th house and squaring your house of self and relationship. It's in a very important part of your chart, because the angles of the chart really create a structure that is something that you both rely on personally, but also you reach out into through the world around you. And this aspect of the Neptune in the fourth can create dynamics in relationship or in terms of your career that can also be confused, especially if you have planets in those signs. So the degrees will depend on the year, because Neptune moves very slowly. And currently, if you have things at the 0 degree point, or up to 2 degrees, 3 degrees of Capricorn or Aries or Cancer or Libra, this will affect you very powerfully. But even later on, as Neptune is going to be moving through there for 14 years, you still want to know that it's going to impact you in a very personal way, in a very important way. Right. I will tell you more and more and more as we go forward, and especially when your ruler, Saturn, moves in On the 25th of May, it moves in with Neptune into your fourth house, and that's going to be an even bigger shift for you. So we'll talk more about that then. And Pluto, my God, Aquarius, this is happening in your third house. Neptune is moving into your house of your mind and how you communicate and speech and how you connect with people, how you exchange things of all kinds, money, ideas, learning, what you learn and the things that you use practically. And with Neptune going in there, there can be a very noticeable creative inspiration or creative bent or an artistic bent. Third house is your skills and talents. If you're a musician, this is fantastic. If you're an artist, use this energy, bottle it up and keep using it to explore and express yourself. There is one thing, of course, to keep in mind, which is that the downside of Neptune is fogginess and not having all the awareness of things, all the information, and having to act from there anyway. So you might find that you need to every now and then step back and pay close attention to what you're thinking, how you're communicating that. Integrity is extremely important in that third house way. Speaking from a place of deep honesty and integrity. This is not that modern idea of speaking my truth, which is usually used as a way of insulting people. Saying that's usually speaking my opinion as opposed to what is really true. And so this could be a time to really recognize that old adage, which is, you know, the questioning of what I'm saying. Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it going to lead to harmony and so on? And I can't remember the rest of it, but anyway, act from that place of right speech, what the Buddhists called the right speech, where we act from as much as possible from a place of honesty and integrity. And that will solve a lot of the problems that might otherwise arise. Now, if you're, again, a creative type, this can be fantastic for writing. It can give you some really great inspiration around a writing project or musical project, or some inspiration around, you know, a book or a blog or some website project or something that you've decided you want to communicate a message that is about a spiritual message, about something that has to do with your understanding and awareness of what is true and right. And generally, that suits everybody. That's very Aquarian and very Neptune in Aries in the third house. And then your ruler Saturn will go into that third house from the 25th of May. And that's going to have a huge impact on you as well, because it'll change the quality of that third house. It will, let's say, tighten up the ship, as it were. And I'll come back and tell you more about that. Your everyday life is definitely impacted. I think you'll hear much more about this when you listen to the eclipse videos, both of them, because this is very much tied into the eclipse video, and certainly listen to the introduction around the Neptune in general in Aries. And good luck with all that, Aquarius. I really think you're in the dans l'air du temps. You're really here to try and pick up on something that is here for all of us to learn from. So I'll see you in the next video. Pisces, Neptune has moved into your second house, and this is the house of everything that supports you. It can represent family and family ties and what goes on in families. So ties with family or even connections around family relationships or family members even can be dissolved in that Neptunian way of dissolution. Again, listen to the introduction, because that notion of who are we really? You know, are we just this body and appearance, or are we much more than that? And that applies very strongly here. Neptune also is, in this case, it's in the house of values, and you might have a complete rehaul of your values over the next 14 years or so. A complete overhaul into, did I say rehaul? I don't even think that's a word. That's also second house, it's words. Neptune, there you go. I'm Pisces stellium. I can't make up my words anymore. I'm channeling the Pisces with Neptune in the second already. And so here we have Neptune in the element of what we value and how we might live through those values. And those will change, but they can also be a source of challenge, because we might be confused around our values, or there may be a temptation to cut corners and to do things in a way that are not in alignment with values, that can cause trouble, and particularly as it's in the second house, The trouble might have something to do with money or resources or what's available to you. And it's very important, as I said in the introduction, important not to jump into things without having a plan, meaning a safety net, a support plan that is for the everyday practical stuff. So it's all well and good to be in your higher-minded vision for life, but you also need to eat. You might need to pay rent or your mortgage, or you'll need to feed the dog and all those practical things. So make sure that you have money and you have things available, or whatever resources that you have a garden or something that is there, that is part of the practical thing that supports you. Neptune in the second can also have you unclear around the topic of what you ingest, whether that's food or whether that even can turn to drugs or other things that are numbing numbing your sensation. If things get too intense, that might be something that people turn to. You've got Pluto in the 12th, and then very soon in July you'll have Uranus moving into the 4th as well. So there can be things that are spiritual or psychological or hidden unconscious things that are heavy, that need your attention, that you want to pay attention to, and that feel too much. They feel like too much. So there can be a potential to reach into addictions, but this is something to keep in your uppermost awareness so that you don't crack open that beer or that pour that glass of wine every day after work. Question why you need it. Don't take it for granted that that's the thing to do it. It's why do I need to numb, or whatever the thing is. And if that's not your case, if it's you don't do drugs, you don't drink, you don't whatever, you might be just tuning into a more sensitive approach to all of those things. And you might, like, for example, when I eat something, if I feel it's not good for me, I muscle test it. I hold it in my hands. There's different ways of doing this, but for me, I hold it in my hands and I see how my body feels, which direction is my body moving when I'm holding it. You can search for muscle testing on YouTube and find that in terms of what you're ingesting. Is this good for me? Because sometimes the mind and the desire nature overrides things. It's like, yeah, I need that whole bar of chocolate. And your body's like, no, don't eat that. So anyway, that's just a thought. Neptune is also in the house of language and words, and also can lead to a new creative aesthetic, a new interest in art or aestheticism, a new way of expressing that potentially as well, because Mars is ruling that from the 5th. So lots and lots of possibilities. You are in the thick of this, in the eye of the storm for sure, because you're changing in a very, very big way. And the Neptune in the second house is a very big part of that. So try to clarify, what ground am I standing on? What do I believe in? What do I have faith in? Why am I doing me in this way is a way of expressing that. All right, Pisces, good luck with that. We'll see you in the next video. Aries, again, speaking of Eye of the Storm, you are in it. You are the star of the show for the next 14 years where Neptune is concerned, for the next 2.5 or 3 years where Saturn is concerned, coming soon to an Aries near you. And this is going to transform you. And what will happen potentially is that you go through a phase, especially in the beginning, of being uncertain who you are. How am I appearing in the world? How am I engaging out in the world? And what this is going to show you is also how you react to how people project things onto you with Neptune in the first house. This will depend very much on your natal chart, but your identity can inflate, deflate, or overinflate accordingly with Neptune going through the first house. And so you might have, even things ranging from extreme self-doubt to extreme delusions of grandeur. Either way is possible, and again, it depends on your natal chart. I would have to see that, but just notice that these will be, with reference to you. How do I show up to the world? Am I showing up in my integrity? Am I showing up as a force for good? Am I showing up in all sincerity, in all honesty? Am I, because this is the Neptune in the first house, and the Neptune in Aries, particularly in the first house, can be imposter syndrome kind of on steroids, and you're going through that for a number of years where you might feel like, I'm just not up to this, and that what's happening is you're doubting your capacity. So come back to yourself, go back to the introduction, see, who am I? Who am I really? It's not the little me doing all these things. I'm being guided to do things. I'm just the receptacle, the channel. I'm the working with the creative force. I am not it. So that is a good opportunity for you. This Neptune in an angular house, especially the house of self, is going to change your dynamic around relationships, around your connection to your roots and family and your psychological and emotional security and foundation and your career. So this is a big thing. It's a game changer for Aries in so many ways. And your energy is very different to Pisces. So I wouldn't even say look back at your Pisces friends and try and figure out what this is like, because it's not the same at all. And you're being reconfigured in your unique Aries way. So, right, I think I'm going to leave it at that, Aries. And maybe just to mention that your ruler Mars is in the fourth house of family, emotionality, what you've come from, who you've come through, your family of origin, your lineage. What guides you in terms of what makes you feel secure or not, and also home. Where do you live? All those questions. So this is where a big part of the focus is now, that answers some of the questions about this Neptune coming into your first house for the first time. Good luck with that, Aries, and I will see you certainly listen to the introduction, by the way. Of course, it's all for you, and I'll see you in the next video. Taurus, this is happening in your 12th house. It's a very mystical place and an almost totally appropriate place to have Neptune, because it's really about your dreams, your inspirations, the things that come through the unconscious. Do be careful around issues of anxiety, sort of a latent uncertainty or fear or anxiety around life. Take care of yourself that way, because the 12th house is also that unconscious place. It's the place where we're not aware of things. We're not aware of what's driving us. So it's good to really regularly check in with yourself, understand how you're feeling, what you're believing, what you're experiencing. You've got Mars, which is ruling that 12th house in the third house of the mind. So that's a good time to really get clear about communication and thinking and the processes around all of that and how it influences you every day. And also your ruler Venus is in the 11th house retrograde with Mercury, which is very, very powerfully connected to Neptune at this time. And they're all connected still to the North Node in a really powerful way. So there's something about your future, or your way of connecting with your future, your visions, your dreams, and also friends and groups and associations, that has already been deeply impacted. You may have been feeling the loss of friends over the last 14 years, the loss of connection with people, or even feeling betrayed by certain relationships. Or maybe your relationships have become more connected to your spiritual self, your spiritual life. That can still continue, but also this becomes much more intimate now with Neptune in the 12th. The one thing I would say is also beware of shenanigans, whether they be relational or financial, anything that is done that is not above board, whether you are feeling tricked and deluded into behavior that is a little bit dodgy or, kind of hidden from view, or whether you're doing that to somebody else. This is really heavy karma in these days. So you're going to have Uranus going into your second house, which is the house of money for you. So I would be very careful. Pluto is in your 10th house of reputation and how that changes. So this would be a good year to live, well, to start, if not already, to live fully from your integrity and really get close to what is true and the impact that your desires and your behaviors and your personal need for comfort has on other people. The Neptune in the 12th can also have you desiring to go abroad or take retreats based on your spiritual practice or your creative side, your creative self, because that's the Neptunian quality as well. Right, I'm going to leave it there, Taurus. We're going to talk so much about this. We're going to have lots of time to look deeply into this, and I just wanted to let you know where that's influencing you going forward. Gemini, this is happening in your 11th house of your vision and your future. What can happen with Neptune in the 11th is that there's a lot of connection with people that either fades away because it's no longer aligning with your vision or your spiritual side, your spiritual ideas, or even your philosophical or political ideas. And that all changes. There's a disappointment, disillusionment in what you thought was going to be your future, or what you thought were your people, what you thought was your team. your connection to people, and that can be very hard. At times it can feel like there's a lot of isolation around that. Go back to the introduction, listen to the introduction to know why that's not true. But this can also have a certain degree of confusion around long-term goals or your sense of what is coming up in the future. When Saturn comes in there, that will make things much more pragmatic, but at the same time can also make this whole thing feel like an impossible dream. It's not that you should stop because of that, it's that you should figure out your modus operandi, what to do about that. Here you have an opportunity to see in a visionary way. So this can be a really great opportunity to develop with a feet on the ground kind of attitude, a new vision. Earlier I mentioned Buckminster Fuller, and I'm thinking like that as a visionary type of person who says, hey, look at this, look over here. And that can be what you contribute then to society, because there's something of this Neptune quality, and later on Saturn, that is about contributing something to society. The eclipse the day before this ingress would have been helping you see that. And think of this as a period of time going forward. It's the start of something. It's not the conclusion of it. So you're just beginning to see something now. But as we go forward, we start to feel our way forward into what Neptune in Aries means. And we can then know which direction to take based on that. Saturn, which is ruling, that is in your second house of values and money. So there may be something connected to that that you need to reflect on. That also reflects on family very strongly for you, because Cancer is the kind of identifies rulers, or not rulers, my God, mothers or family generally. And when Mars goes in there, there may be some tension around that, and that's part of this dynamic because Mars is ruling your 11th. And your natal ascendant, sun, or moon ruler is Mercury, which is retrograding in the 10th house of your vision for your sort of your social aims or your professional aims or your vocation, what you want to do, how that reaches out into your experience of self in the world, how people see you. This is part of maybe redefining how people see you and showing up in a new way. You get to rebirth yourself. You get to redefine yourself with the Neptune in Aries. It's not that that shouldn't happen. Especially when it's done consciously. It's like, I'm so done being who I feel myself, or how I've been feeling. Especially Jupiter in the first gives you lots of inspired action around that, ruling this 10th house and the North Node there. I'm going to show up differently. I want to be different in the world, and I need to mull that over as Mercury, your ruler, is retrograding with Venus and the North Node and Saturn. So big story happening for you, Gemini, that will continue chapter by chapter as we go forward. And finally, Cancer. Yes, finally, because we started with Leo, so we end with Cancer, where we find the Neptune at the top of the chart. This is going to change your attitude towards your ambitions in life, towards your goals, overall, sort of overarching goals for your career, or what you might describe as a vocation. It also can describe issues around family in terms of parents, terms of potentially authority figures as well, having disillusionment, if not already around those things, around how you show up in the world and how people see you as well. So, with this quality of Neptune in the 10th, there also, much like our Aries friends, there can be a certain amount of projection onto you, where people don't see really who you are, but they're projecting what they want onto you. So be careful of that. Cancer, this is especially true because Mars, which is ruling that 10th house, is in your sign. And although the dial has moved on now because I'm going sign by sign, on the 30th of March, when Neptune moved in there, the moon was still in Aries with Chiron in a square to Mars. And so that was a mutual exchange that is supportive. And there's a story that connects you personally into that 10th house of your visibility, your reputation, your career, your goals for your future. Cancer is a very goal-oriented sign with reference to career and how you act in the world, acting now perhaps with Neptune there in a way that can be self-sacrificing, or delusional. You get to decide. All of those are possible. And then again, we've got all this activity in the ninth house where Mercury is lining up with Neptune, as well as Venus, the North Node, and Saturn. All of that contributing to this bigger question of who am I now? How do I reach out? How do I bring what I believe in out into the world? What do I need to do that? Saturn will help to structure that, but also can make you feel a little delayed in that. The Neptune in the 10th can also have you feeling disappointment, disillusionment with your career, or for that matter, with your with your marital partner, if that's the case. And you would need to see the natal chart for that to be clear, right? So that can also have you finding somebody who is a life partner who has a very spiritual connection to you. And especially because Saturn rules your house of relationship, both of relationship in the 7th as well as marriage, the 8th. And when Saturn goes into the 10th house, that for Cancer particularly can be a very strong indication of marriage or a recommitment or a commitment to somebody. And that can be wonderful and dreamy as long as you're paying attention to your red flags, Cancer. So I'm going to leave it there. There's a lot more to say that I will continue to say over the many years that Neptune is in your 10th house. For everyone here still, thank you so much for being here, and I appreciate your attention for this very long video, and I will see you in the next one. Oh, yes, and don't forget like and subscribe and all of those usual things that I forget to say. Thanks for being here.